How's it going, my friends? It's Ryan with Reformation Designs, and you are tuned into the Creative Revolution podcast. Today, I am interviewing my friend Shashi Jain. He's an innovation manager at Intel. He runs a 3D printing meetup in Portland, Oregon, and we're going to be talking all about creating the future. This is the Creative Revolution podcast, Season 2, Episode 5, and we're going live right now. Hello, everybody. My name is Ryan Rhoades. I am the founder and creative director at Reformation Designs, and you are tuned into the Creative Revolution podcast. Today, I'm here with my friend Shashi Jain. He is the innovation manager at Intel, and he runs a 3D printing meetup in Portland. He's doing some really cool stuff with artificial intelligence and NASA and all kinds of cool stuff. We're going to get into that in here in a little bit. But Shashi, first and foremost, thank you for being on the show today. How are you, sir?
Hey, Ryan, I'm amazing, and thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So how about before we get started here, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit and talk about who you are, why you got started doing what you're doing, and some of the things that you're working on these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wear a bunch of different hats, and the cool thing is that I'm able to kind of combine all these different things that I'm doing in fun and unique ways. First and foremost, on my day job, I'm an innovation manager at Intel, and I focus in on IoT, machine learning, and VR. And what that affords me is the ability to take Intel's products and put them in places they were never meant to go and see what happens. So, I've been able to work with automatically creating and generating 3D printable medical wearables. I've been able to work with AI and space exploration, and in particular on lunar resource prospecting, which is a thing now, which is kind of amazing. I've also been able to look at, the future of the PC as well, which is Intel's bread and butter. As you mentioned, I'm really into 3D printing. I run the Portland 3D Printing Lab Meetup, which has about 1,400 members. And we meet at least once a month to bring really enthusiastic people, designers, do-it-yourselfers, and hackers, of all types, actually, together to talk about the future of 3D printing, but also to work on big projects. Like we 3D printed half a cow one time, just because we could. And then we've also had projects in the Portland Art Museum, and then we're at Maker Faire every year.
Absolutely.
But one of the things, go ahead, please.
Oh no, I was going to say absolutely. That was actually one of the cooler experiences that I've had since moving to the Portland area, was being able to help you guys out at your 3D printing booth at the Maker Faire a couple years ago.
Yeah, it's a fun time, and it's probably I think we have something like 3,000 square feet at OMSI, that's all 3D printing, and we have a lot of fun with that. But one of my projects that's nearest and dearest to my heart is the Thai Young Entrepreneurs Program, where we teach innovation and entrepreneurship to high school students through a Invention education curriculum. All this to say, we help students see entrepreneurship as a career path by having them build startups with each other while they're in high school. So I've been doing that with Thai Young Entrepreneurs Oregon, or TYE Oregon, for the last 5 years. And last year I became the global education director of TYE.
So what is TYE for those who aren't sure?
Certainly. TYE stands for Thai Young Entrepreneurs. Okay. And Thai is an organization that's it was founded by a group of Indian entrepreneurs down in the Bay Area about 28 years ago. And that's TIE, the Indus Entrepreneurs.
Oh, okay. Very cool. I'm just taking some notes here, so I'm not ignoring you. So one of the things that I love to talk about on the show here is just the myriad of ways that creativity plays into our everyday lives. And a lot of people that I run into in the work that I do, for whether it's my coaching clients or my design clients or whatever, a lot of times I find that people inherently, a lot of them just believe that they're not creative. They believe that creativity is something that only special people have access to. They believe that creativity is something that, just kind of falls out of the sky and hits really amazing people in the head one day, and then pow, they're creative. So can you expand on that a little bit, and with your experience with all the different creative things that you're doing? I know that you kind of see yourself as someone who, I can't remember the article that you sent me, the name that they used. It wasn't polymath. I mean, that's another name for it. But what was that article you sent me about, basically all the different things that you're interested in? Do you remember which one I mean?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that one was actually a TED Talk by Emily Wapnick, who created the term multi-potentialite.
Okay.
And what that means is that there's people who have all these interests, and sometimes they work with these interests all at once. Sometimes they go deep in one area, and then they just change their interest year over year. And sometimes they kind of cross the beam, so to speak, is how I put it, and bring one way of thinking into another area altogether. So I'm one of those people that has like 16 different projects at any given time, and I work on them a little bit at a time and find ways to meld them together. But that's and that's to the heart of why people think that they can't be creative, because they sometimes don't know what creativity can be. They think of it as the art skill, or the drawing skill, making something from working with their hands, or digital illustration. There's a whole bunch of examples that we call creative, but creativity in my mind is taking an idea and bringing it to life. And you can do that with any number of surprising skills, and do it in different ways. So, think about, for example, how 3D printing is applied to prosthetics. I mean, how did that come up? The story is that a South African carpenter named Richard Van Os saw a puppeteer who was just kind of messing around with, making large hand extensions to kind of make a Hulk hand, if you will. Right. And he was just playing around on YouTube. And that guy said, hey, if you can make a Hulk hand, then maybe you can also make me a set of real hands. And then they applied his puppetry expertise to his carpentry expertise and made the first generation of these prosthetic hands. And then they open sourced it, and then it became this whole movement that's reaching now thousands of people worldwide and doing some good. I mean, that's creativity. And it didn't necessarily start with 3D printing and 3D modeling and motors and all this kind of stuff.
Right. It started with some person who had a piece of the puzzle saying, hey, this is pretty cool. And then someone else who had a different piece of the puzzle saying, hey, I could apply what you're doing to something that I'm doing. And it took them being willing to kind of take those pieces together. And I think that it was actually Albert Einstein who he coined the term combinatory play. And he said that was essentially the way that he went about solving most of his problems, was that he would take different things that a lot of people, wouldn't see a use for when you put them together. And he would just kind of sit there and meditate on like, oh, how can I use this thing here in conjunction with this thing to solve a potentially different problem that nobody has thought of before.
Absolutely. The best way to be creative and to inspire creativity is to start with a problem, or start with, some pain point that someone is experiencing. But you don't have to be the one who brings all the pieces to the table. In fact, I was literally just writing a blog post on what it means to be a catalyst. And, a person who's a catalyst can bring together not only the right people, but the right skill sets, and give them an intent, by putting the parts together and making them greater than the sum of the whole, or the sum of the parts rather, making the whole greater than the sum of the parts is, I guess, the way they say it. But sometimes, just bringing things together doesn't start any actions.
Right.
It's a special kind of person to show them the way, essentially, and that's what a catalyst is there for, is to show them the way and to build this greater vision into reality. And if that's not creativity, I'm not sure what is.
Right. Absolutely. And do you think that creativity and the idea of being a catalyst for for change, a catalyst for good, whatever, do you think that those are things that can be learned? Do you think those are things that can be cultivated and trained? Or do you think it's something that's just kind of, genetically inherent, or maybe a combination of both?
That's a great question. And, when I speak to educators about invention education, this is the question that is first and foremost on their minds. And the short answer is absolutely can be done. It can be trained. It could be turned into a process. Oftentimes we think of creatives and entrepreneurs as those who are willing to take wild risks with their time and with their careers to do something really inventive. And there is some of that, but there's a skill in being able to being able to envision something and then to stop thinking about it and start acting. And that's a skill that can be taught through, some basic analysis. It can be, you can teach the process of innovation, and empathy. That's design thinking. You can teach how to build quick prototypes. That's rapid prototyping. But the skill that a person needs to, kind of induce this creativity and get them on the road is to stop asking for permission to innovate. We oftentimes will stop ourselves from getting on this path by wondering, oh, well, someone else is going to need to give me permission. And I can tell you, at least when I talk to my corporate entrepreneurs who are struggling with this, I'll tell them, you're in an organization that is hyper optimized to do one thing. And anything that is not that thing, it's very easy for them to say no to this. And what they find is that, they'll propose their ideas and they'll get shot down. Mm-hmm. I see on the flip side, highly creative people on the outside who are not in corporations stop themselves, saying, well, why am I the one to be doing this? Right. Am I the right person? The answer is you are the right person if you're passionate enough about solving the problem, if you could bring something to bear and you're willing to invest the energy. And I've seen this time and time again. So stop asking for permission to innovate. And then the second part would be saying yes a little bit more than you say no. Like I said, it's easy for someone to stop you by saying no, but it's easy for you to stop yourself by saying no as well. So take a chance to say yes on yourself.
So how do you? This is actually a question that I've been pondering a lot myself lately. I recently started reading an excellent book by Greg Mackion. I probably butchered his name. I listened to he was on a podcast with Tim Ferriss, and he wrote a book, an excellent book called Essentialism. And the subtitle of that book is The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. And he talks about how whenever we're doing any kind of creative thing or building any kind of business or whatever it is, whether it's trying to figure out how to innovate more in our industry or whatever, that there's so many choices that we can make, but oftentimes a lot of them can just end up being distractions. And so for you, like, how do you differentiate between saying yes to the right things instead of, saying yes to all the things and not really getting anywhere? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of thoughts that I had here, because I'm one of those people that says yes to most things.
Okay.
But I also try to think about where in time are those things meant to be for me personally. So I read this really great book called Multipliers. It's about how there are some managers out there who can pull the most amazing amount of effort, double the amount of effort out of a person, just by changing their management style. And it offered a piece of advice that I thought was really sound here. And that was to look for things that you can delegate to free yourself up for things that will make you grow. So when I look at the opportunities that arise anymore, I use that lens. So is this something that is going to help me grow? If not, who can I delegate it to so that others can grow to where I am right now?
Right.
So that would be like if I'm doing a 3D printing project and it's really, complex print, it's really fun. It may be easy for me to do, but I then think about, is this really something that I've done before? And if it is, I pass it on to someone in my 3D printing meetup for whom this would be a challenge, number one, and for whom it would open up opportunities too. So, just recently I was approached by someone who said that they needed, someone who could, put a critical eye on their 3D printer and, give them advice on where to go. So I was like, yeah, this is a great opportunity. I've done something like this before, and I could probably add a lot of value. But I pushed that into my network, and now we have two people who needed that chance, and now they're able to grow and do some really interesting things as well. So I would highly suggest doing that, and then making sure that for the ones that are left, you sort of borrow from the salesperson's bag of tricks and create this pipeline or this funnel of projects. I always have this where I have, just like a salesperson will have people who are prospects, people who are interested, people who are, and so on and so forth. I'll have that for my projects as well. Things I'm interested in, things that I'm actively working on, things I've closed, and things that I've moved on to. And I'll constantly be pulling from there if I get bored or if I get stuck in one area or if I need to really reshift my priorities.
So that's a great point. In terms of how you do that on a practical level, I know for me, I use a variety of different software applications to help me manage all the different moving parts of my business pursuits and my personal projects and things like that. One of the ones that I use all the time is called Trello. I'm sure you've probably heard of it. There's other ones, Asana, Evernote, different things like that. So for you, how do you manage all of those different moving parts? Because I know for me, it got to a point where I couldn't deal with having another Post-it note on my computer or somewhere in my office, because it got to the point where I had so many Post-it notes everywhere, I didn't know where the heck to put anything, and so, or how to find things. So do you use different applications for managing all of that?
Yeah, sadly it's pretty much more low tech than that. I actually maintain lists.
Okay.
So
hey, but whatever works. I mean, you have a system is what it boils down to that works for you.
Yeah. And then the most important things that I need to be aware of, that I need a reminder of, it's over my shoulder here on that magnetic board.
Okay. Yeah. I have several right over here.
Absolutely. That's the way that my mind works. I recently learned about a technique for managing the progression of a project that has really rung true for me. And actually, it's like old school intel. I didn't even realize this until I was halfway done with the book. But they're called OKRs, Objectives and Key Results.
Okay.
So there's a book called Measure What Matters by John Doerr. And this guy was in the 70s and the early 80s working for Andy Grove of Intel. And this was Andy Grove's management technique. So after John had left, he went to the Bay Area. Actually, I think he was already in the Bay Area, but he took this technique to Google and to the Gates Foundation and a few other places, and essentially supercharged the way they do business or they do nonprofit work. The idea is that for every project you can decompose it into visionary goals. Those are the objectives. and then you could generate key results which are highly measurable that will move you forward. So let's say if I'm working on a project and it's related to machine learning, for example, that my vision is to make NASA use the data they already have to do better mapping for rover positioning on the moon. And then a key result underneath there would be to hit 99% accuracy in the positioning system in our AI model, mm-hmm. for example. And then you can take that, apply it to a team, and then a team would be able to decompose that into objectives for them to achieve those results. Make sense?
Yeah,
kind of like in a tree.
So it's more about helping teams to really understand what it is that they're aiming at.
Yeah. And even if you're a team of one, you can use this to break down the problem into atomic enough chunks, small enough chunks that you can keep motivated, you can keep moving things along. So again, we're talking about crossing the streams, crossing the beams here. I've had some of my students using this same technique as well. And just recently I had one of them use this to win a competition.
Oh, nice.
The TYE. That's really cool.
Very cool. This has been really good so far. I really appreciate the insight into your processes and just kind of the way you think. That's one of the most interesting things for me about doing this podcast and doing these kind of interviews, because I've got a really fascinating network of people that I've met over the years, either through business connections or other networking events or things that I've met over the years. And the cool thing for me is seeing all of the different commonalities across industries and across different practices for making, getting things done, and how they leverage their own creative process, the different systems and those kinds of things. So this has been really helpful. Kind of piggybacking off something you said earlier about, people getting in their own way. And, people are always asking for permission to innovate or permission to do something awesome. I find that, at least in my own experience, there's what you hear a lot of people call the imposter syndrome, this kind of feeling like, who am I to do X, Y, or Z? And a lot of times, artists, musicians, writers, business owners, and pretty much creators of any type will run into periods of their careers where they feel like they're just spinning their wheels. They feel like they're not getting where they want to go. How do you handle that problem? And do you have any thoughts on why you think that happens?
Let me start with the second half of that. Okay. I am personally going through that right now with the idea of writing a book about some of the stuff I've been doing with corporations working with startups. And I mean, there's this thought that you get too close to a problem or you get too close to a subject, and then you're not able to articulate, or you get kind of bound up with all the different minutia that you can't see the forest for the trees. Mm-hmm. But I often find that the problem really is that we want the thing to be perfect, and we can't let go of the vision of perfection. So what I try to do is I try to practice letting go of it entirely. Just to say, for a certain amount of time, I'm not going to look at it. I'm not going to think about it. And I'm not going to do anything about it. And it doesn't matter what the deadlines are. It doesn't matter what the deliverables may be, or anything. And then I come back to it with a renewed sense of urgency, in a sense. So if I'm too close to it, I'll step away for a long time, either by working on a different problem, or something else entirely. And I'll come back to it with fresh eyes. And if my fresh eyes are still blocked up or or if I'm still blocked up after that, then I'll step away again. Usually within 2 to 3 cycles of this, I'm able to do it. I'm able to find that same motivation, that same spark, and then grow that into a fire.
And so, do you find that I've run into this? I mean, I resonate with this very, very intensely, and it's weird how, you know, this is something that I coach my clients in, but I deal with it just the same with my own projects. And have you found that there have been different times where, you know, something that you thought was going to be really important or whatever, that after those cycles of stepping away, that you realized, oh, you know what, like I'm not really feeling this anymore, and I'm just going to kind of put this on the back burner indefinitely? Is that something that you've run into different times?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you a great example of that that's happening to me right now.
Okay.
About 10 years ago, I worked with my parents to make this website with religious translations of material from our culture. And really, I did this because, you know, like, I was having kids at the time, and I needed to at some point be able to explain to them, you know, what was in our religious books. And so I started translating this material, and I did such a bad job of it. My folks came to me and said, "Look, you don't know Hindi or Sanskrit well enough to do this." And so they started translating for me, you know, because the way it works is is the best way to get the right answer on the internet is to put the wrong answer out there. Right? Everyone will tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this case, my parents did that, and we got almost everything translated. I'd say about 90% of what we wanted. And then someone came along and scraped my entire site and then put it up on his own. And they got into this weird fight with Automatic, you know, the founders of WordPress.
Yeah.
Had to come and mediate it, and killed my interest in doing this project, which is kind of sad. But I recently came back to it, and I was like, I'm going to get this back up and running. I'm going to put it on modern technology, and we're going to do this amazing stuff. But I hit the wall, you know, came back, and I was like, I've been here. I've done this before. I'm not sure if I can do it again.
Right.
So I went through that cycle 3 times. I walked away and came back. And then that third time, I sat down and said, you know what? The problem is I don't want to revisit the same thing. So I took my own advice, and I found someone who could help me do those things that I wasn't prepared to do again. So I opened the opportunity for you know, a former student of mine to pick up and run with you know, getting the site up and running again. And lo and behold, he's doing an amazing job at that. And it's kind of re-sparked and reignited my interest in making this thing happen again. But maybe not in the same way. It's kind of shown me that the time for that website is past, maybe, and that maybe I need to revisit this as an app or as a book. So that's what I'm headed to now. But it's led me into these creative explorations of what it needs to be by delegating off those things I don't want to do.
So maybe it's really an issue then of, you know, it's not that the idea it wasn't even a bad idea as much as, oh, it just wasn't either the right timing for it or maybe just not the right medium for it.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes bringing someone else in and working at it and telling you you're wrong, or you know, showing you a different path to get where you need to go on it.
Right. Absolutely.
At least it did for me.
Absolutely. I've seen that time and time again with countless different projects, whether it's websites or I published my second book in July, and that project took me, man, I think I started it about 4.5 years ago. And I mean, it's not a big book. I mean, it's you know, like a few hundred pages or a couple hundred pages. And it's actually a book that's in the public domain originally. So when I initially started it, I was like, oh, you know, there's so many versions of this book out there. and it's in the public domain, I can just basically copy and paste the text and make a better looking cover, because as a designer, I'm like, I know that people do judge a book by its cover. And all the covers out there I thought were terrible. So I was like, oh, well, this will be like an easy source of income for me. I can make a better cover and put it on Amazon, and it'll just sell, and I'll make be another stream of income. But as I started doing it, I over and over, I realized I was like, I don't want to just like throw something together just for the sake of throwing it together. So I ended up, over the course of about 4.5 years, I had in like an old copy of it that, and I know that you don't like people writing in books, but I write in books that I do, or that I read. And I had written all these notes on like if I was gonna translate this old text into a new version, how I would do that and whatever. And I never even really thought that I was going to actually take those notes and put them in the final book, but that's what I ended up doing. And so I ended up, taking this text that was written in like the early 1900s, and there's a lot of kind of archaic language in it. It can get kind of confusing and be really, a little too super spiritual for people who are probably in my audience. And so basically what I did is I just, after some of these different sections that I felt needed a little more modern clarification, I added, several paragraphs of like, hey, here's another way to look at this if this feels a little too out of your league or feels kind of weird. And then in addition to that, I added a bunch of additional reading recommendations, books that I found to be very helpful for my own career and my own creativity and things. And, it took 4.5 years to finish this thing that I thought I'd be able to get done in, a couple of months, just because I knew the technical process of how to publish a book, just because of my experience in the publishing industry. And so it was definitely a real journey for me, but I'm really, really pleased with the personal and professional development that happened on that journey. So, I mean, with you and this website or this book or this app that you're working on, obviously, I mean, you said, what was it, like 10 years ago or something that you started it and were kind of playing with the idea of it?
Yeah, it was 10 years ago, and it was up and running for like 6, 7 years
Okay.
before that conflict happened.
Okay. But I'm sure that now, you're coming at it with fresh eyes. You're coming at it with more wisdom, more experience, and more ideas of, how you can leverage your experience up to this point to create a better final product, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. Okay. So we're at about the halfway mark. And for those of you who are watching, if you have any comments or questions for us while we're watching, or if you're watching on the replay, definitely you can leave a comment and let us know. But if you have questions, comments, things that you'd like Shashi or I to talk about, go ahead and drop them in there. We'll see it. If you are watching live, if you could do me a huge favor and leave a comment on the video and just say #live. If you're watching the replay, just write #replay. It helps me know, more who's watching and how, so that we can create better content for you guys. So Shashi, you teach innovation and entrepreneurship in a variety of capacities. You also do a lot of really interesting work with artificial intelligence and 3D printing, space exploration, and how all of these things kind of work together. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you envision the future unfolding the next 5 to 10 years and the applications of these different technologies and how we can kind of leverage that in our own careers and our own lives? What do we need to be prepared for, so to speak?
That's a fantastic question. So what working with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning has really done for me is kind of opened my eyes to the power of data collection and optimization and doing pattern recognition and for future results. We are in a really interesting time now where people who are doing repetitive work or work that is very heuristics based and rules based, their jobs are going to be automated, And this is every industry is going to be impacted by this, which is not a bad thing. I mean, if we're not prepared, if we're not doing anything about it, then yeah, it's going to harm careers for sure. But it's going to open us up to other ways of thinking, other types of ways of using our time, other types of careers that we can't even imagine right now. So what I tell my students is, what is it that you can do that can't be automated? And a lot of it comes down to user experience and creative exploits. That's designing UI interactions. It involves art. It involves empathy and understanding where how people are experiencing a problem. It's about intuition. It's about many of those soft things that we consider soft skills. So it wasn't an accident that I talked about being a catalyst. That's exactly what I'm trying to teach my students to be, is that you don't have to be super specialized in any one area. If you can recognize that there are things that need to come together to solve a problem and be the thing that draws them together. So just going to give you the link here to if you want to know more about the TIE program, it's oregon.tie.org. That's tie.org/programs/TYE.
So oregon.tie.org/programs/TYE.
Yeah. And if you're watching this, just go look at the things that we teach in there. It's all of those things that we talked about. Customer empathy, design thinking, working in a team, looking at skills, rapid prototyping, presentation practice. There's nothing in there that's like really MBA focused or anything like that. There's nothing in there that says we need like a machine learning developer or someone with deep skills as an app developer. It's bring what you have and then create something new with that. And the ability to look past one's own career and vocation, what they're doing today, is actually a really important skill, and to see what you can become, how to invent the next best version of yourself. Is an incredible skill that most of my students are learning right now.
So how would you, if there's like, a 3-step program for doing that? I mean, obviously it's not a small question to, these are deep questions that require a lot of introspection and what I think Cal Newport calls deep work. How do you help your students who are feeling stuck in that spot where they feel like they've done a whole lot of things, they've learned a bunch of different things, but they're not sure where they fit in this tapestry of life that we're all weaving together, so to speak?
I'm going to go back to where we met originally to answer that question, and that's Startup Weekend. We had met, I don't know how many years ago at Startup Weekend.
I think it was 2015. Yeah,
maybe even earlier than that.
Maybe even earlier than that, yeah.
So I had been running Startup Weekends here in Portland for about 5 years. And the reason why I was doing that as a volunteer is that it changed my life. It sort of reframed for me what my skill set was and what it was useful for. And I learned that very core fundamental philosophy that I have about not asking for permission to innovate there. But I also learned from that that your skills don't define you. The application of those skills don't define you. The experience that you create with them for others is more what really defines you and what your value is in any given situation. So what I try to do with my students is give them a space to try new things that they didn't see necessarily in themselves, or that they thought that they always wanted for themselves. And in a place where there are stakes, but there aren't stakes so high that it would cause lasting damage, for example. So let me make it a little bit clearer and more real.
Sure.
You know, there are students who come to me that to TYE, to who are driven to create new businesses. There's some that are very entrepreneurial, but just don't know what to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some who are being forced there by their parents, and they have interests that are, not even close to these things. Well, our job is to do is when they find an idea that they'd like to work on, they're in the team. They form a team, is to draw the best performance out of them as individuals and as a group. And what we do is we ask them what they would like to do, what skills they bring to the table, and how they would like to grow. And that's actually, those three questions are the foundation of how I manage people as well. So, what skills do they bring? I have some students that say, I'm an artist, I'm a logo designer, I can do, this particular set of things. I like to play on Photoshop, for example. I have some students that say I'm amazing at social media. And still others, that they're developers or they have biz dev skills. And I have some students who say I don't know anything at all. And those are the ones that are usually really interesting.
Right.
Because, you have to give, ask them, what is it that they're doing on the outside? And you can usually find something they're just super passionate about. Like one guy was completely detached from what we were doing in TYE, and he would go and sit and just watch YouTube video after YouTube video in class, while we were doing this. And then we were like, well, what are you watching? And it turns out that he really loved, these car rebuilding type of videos.
Sure.
And that he had done a bunch of them himself. So I was like, dude, here's your skill. Maybe this is your superpower.
Right.
Why don't you why don't you make those videos? Document them, document all of our other student teams as videos.
Right.
And he did that. He didn't have to settle into one team, but he owned the camera for the entire program. And, he made some, I'd say probably a huge splash that way in that program. And now he's thinking about, well, how can I take that skill and take it to the next level and to the next level and the next level beyond that? Anyway, I'm going to pause there because I gave you a really long answer to a short question.
Oh no, that's really great. I thought that all of it was very pertinent, and I think that what it really boils down to when it comes to any kind of innovation. I mean, I try to mentally transport myself to other time periods sometimes when I'm meditating or whatever, reading books. It's like, what would it have been like if you were a company that sold horses and buggies whenever Henry Ford came around? And it's like, do you double down on the way things have always been and, give into fear and tell yourself this narrative that, oh my God, my life is over? Or do you apply yourself and learn everything you can about, new and upcoming skill sets so that you can create jobs instead of trying to go and look for a job? That to me is I think really one of the hallmarks of what it means to be an entrepreneur, to be a creator, is that you're not so much, looking for someone to just hand you a paycheck as much as like, hey, what kind of value can I bring? What kind of problems can I solve? What kind of things can I create that didn't exist before? And so much of, what I hear people freaking out about automation and losing their jobs and all this other stuff, I tell them all the time, I'm like, okay, this is a reality. This is something that, jobs that have been around for a long time are going away faster and faster. But like you said before, what are the things that you can do that currently, anyway, can't be replaced by a computer? And I saw an article going around, I think Entrepreneur Magazine posted it, that there's all these predictions from people who, at least have a pretty strong idea of the way things are going, that it's going to be the people who have learned how to tap into their creativity who are going to be the ones who are the most successful in the future, because those repetitious jobs of just, that's what computers are good at, is doing repetitive tasks.
Yeah, yeah. It's one thing that that's left unsaid from the answer I gave you before is that I teach my students and entrepreneurs inside of Intel as well how to kind of put yourself out of business. How do you how do you try something new, get to where you need to be, and then move on? Because in this is a skill of being able to, number one, teach yourself how to learn. Number two, being able to let go. And three, knowing when enough is enough. And then being comfortable in changing. A lot of times people are really not comfortable with change.
Right.
And making yourself comfortable with change and small things that don't matter will make you more comfortable with change when the time does come where your main career occupation may not be there anymore.
Right.
So I would say practice that. Practice that in your side projects. Practice that in smaller projects, in gig work, whatever you do.
And learning how, I actually have a little poster that I have hanging up in my office here that just says "act without expectation," and learning to obviously set good goals and set smart goals and things like that. But same kind of concept is don't hold on to the outcome, because you might end up missing something that actually would end up being better for you in the long run.
Yeah. Another way I had thought of that is, always be envisioning a future version of yourself. And if you're only able to envision a future version of yourself doing the same things you've always done, then you're probably not going to do well with change. When automation comes.
Right.
If you're, one of my favorite quotes, and you'll see it on my website, which you have here, kindly. That's awesome. Is that life begins where your comfort zone ends.
Yeah.
And it's been true in my career, and almost anyone I know, who's been in tech long enough knows that change is coming.
Right. Usually, by the time you finish that sentence, it's already happened. It just hasn't. Mm-hmm. I think it was the sci-fi writer William Gibson said a long time ago. He said, "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed."
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. So I have a question from Joshua here. He said, "There's a huge opportunity for people and companies with big resources utilizing massive data acquisition. Do you see that these will become more available to the more common man, or as the algorithms and data usage calculations get more complicated, will they become less attainable?"
No, that's a really interesting question. Let me tell you how things are rolling out today, and then I'll attempt to answer that for tomorrow. I've been to a number of conferences focused on deep learning and machine learning and AI, and what you see is researchers freely sharing the methods, the model, so to speak, and the algorithms. In the past, these algorithms, the procedural algorithms, would be considered the bread and butter,
like the intellectual property kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's being considered intellectual property now are the trained models that are trained using the data sets that the companies are able to collect. And you may find that they're willing to release and open up some of the data that they're using to train their model, but not all of it. Mm-hmm. There may be dimensions that they're leaving out of the public version, or data repositories that are just private to themselves, which is why it's so important that to Facebook and Google and whomever, all these other big companies are, to gather as much data from their users as possible to tailor their products as closely as they can to. And so, will the data acquisition be available to us? Some of it, but they're not going to give you enough data to put them out of business. You'll have to.
It looks like something disconnected here. It might reconnect here in a second. Hang on one second.
Sure.
Oh, I think we're back.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah. So yeah, they're not necessarily going to give you the data to be competitive with them. to train a model that would be competitive with them. Um, so as the algorithms get more complex, the complexity for machine learning and deep learning models is and how they convolve and bring the data together to generate new insights. So it's all going to be data driven. He who controls the sources of data or is able to generate new insights for the data are the ones that are going to do well. If you're interested in looking to see what open data sets look like, go to data.gov, and those are thousands upon thousands of open data sets provided by the U.S. government.
So
And
just to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, of course, since because of the shutdown, data.gov is not up at the moment.
We won't comment on that. I do my best to keep politics out of my show.
Certainly.
But yes, if you're seeing or hearing this after the shutdown finally ends, make sure to go to data.gov and check that out. For those of you who are watching, I did have a bit of a tech hiccup here, and on my end it says that we're still streaming. Can those of you who are watching, if you could just leave me a quick comment and let me know that you can still hear us. I just want to make sure that I'm not just streaming this endlessly and no one is hearing it. Actually, and on the data note, Shashi, I'm curious. How do you feel like? What are your thoughts on how to address some of these colossal, like, unfathomable data breaches, and what to do about it? Because it's something that a lot of us, I feel like every day I'm not naive to the irony of me streaming this on Facebook while we're talking about, these kinds of things. But how does that, how do you see that getting fixed? Do you see it getting fixed? Do you envision some dystopian nightmare Orwellian future, or somewhere in between? Like, what does that look like for you?
It's a really deep question. I'm just going to answer it at a very high level, maybe almost philosophically.
Okay.
Honestly, I think we're going to have higher expectations out of the people who are collecting our data. And to some people, that translates into regulation. You have to have a stick for that you can beat them with if they misused personal data.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to have some kind of consequences for these breaches that actually materially matter. That goes from fines on one side to dissolution of the corporate charter on the other end. I think the answer is somewhere in between. I've certainly seen some of the people in blockchain talking about solutions to this, but I haven't seen something that really convinces me yet that we have a solid answer behind this. Certainly we can apply machine learning and deep learning for fraud detection, and that's what's happening right now, like in credit cards, looking at patterns of transactions that are indicative of fraud happening. But that's not always the case, that you can apply that inside of a corporate network to see that a breach is happening.
Right.
So, yeah, there's a number of companies that are looking at the response to breaches right now. There's a company called Radar. In fact, my co-teacher Travis works at this company, and they are all about how do you respond to breaches and contain them as fast as possible. But if you flip that around and say, well, how do you protect against these things? The answers come back. There's technical measures, and then there's business measures and governmental measures.
So likely just a combination of both. And I think that really the thing that encourages me about all of it is that the conversation's happening, and there are very smart people who are very interested in and invested in making sure that these problems get solved, who are working on it. So that is encouraging to me. And obviously, so many of these questions that our culture is wrestling with nowadays are the kinds of things where there isn't just some black and white simple answer, and we've been so conditioned to, want those kinds of, well, just flip this switch and, fix it, but it's not really ever like that, at least in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just thinking about this as you were asking or you're talking about this. What if we were to make our data just not that valuable? Is there a scenario where our personal information is the stuff that's not as valuable or as dangerous to have out there is the thing that the companies need to use to personalize their products or achieve their business goal, or if there becomes some sort of equality in the transaction of they're using our data for their purposes. Like, do we get paid for access to our data with microtransactions or something else? That's where I can definitely see something happening there.
Well, yeah, and I mean, in terms of, if we're going to be talking about innovation and whatever, I think that so much of it is, I know that I think Brent is probably watching. He and I talk about this a lot, and one of the things that comes up is that, so many of us kind of grew up on the golden age of the internet before so much of it was just ad revenue driven, and this idea that we have to use advertising to run a website or whatever. It's like I don't agree with that. I think that that's ridiculous. It's the way things have been done for a really long time. It's the model you see a lot of the publishing industry, the newspaper industry, and whatever adopting. I mean, you can't go on hardly any website now where it's like, okay, you get 3 articles for free and then you have to subscribe and whatever. And I don't know about you, but I don't subscribe to any of those. I'm like, I can just read an article somewhere else, or if you're going to put a paywall up, like, it's not that important to me. Now that's just me, and maybe it's because of, I grew up in an era when it wasn't like that, and now I'm seeing these microtransactions all over the place in video games and, websites and all these other things. And I feel like as a culture, I've had a really hard time coming across anybody who's like, oh, I love this experience. So, you talk about user experience and things like that. I'm constantly, when I'm doing websites and, creating experiences like this podcast and whatever, I'm always thinking like, how can I create something that people are going to want to actually encounter and experience without feeling that they're constantly getting interrupted? So do you have any thoughts on that? Like that whole like interruption model of content consumption. I mean, it's kind of like we all grew up watching our parents flip channels on TV, and it's like I feel like nowadays it's just, everyone's just swiping on their phone. It's just the equivalent of it.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the content that I do pay for and what I am subscribed to, and there's really not that much other than, business insights. There's some the YouTube channels that I support on Patreon. Mm-hmm. But in fact, I'll give you an example. There's the 8-bit guy who is like a Commodore 64 expert, and the guy is just probably he has one of the simplest way of explaining deeply complex concepts that I've ever seen. And so, I appreciated what he did for me because he gave me he put out about 40 hours worth of content that just had me enthralled. And I was like, yeah, you know what? That's worth $10 a month for a couple of months to me. So yeah, let's put that out there. And then I met him in person, and we got talking about his methodology, the way he does things, and I was just like, you know what? I can support that.
Right. Well, that patronage
but
model
it's not cool.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's the patronage model. Yeah.
I actually, on last season of the podcast, I did an interview with some friends of mine who they actually have a YouTube channel that's gotten very, very successful and continues to grow, and they have a Patreon account, and I think they're pulling in like between $14,000 and $15,000 a month just making YouTube videos where they are watching anime and talking about it. So they'll watch it off screen because they can't have it on screen because of copyright issues, but they'll watch it and then like react to it, pause it, and like talk amongst themselves. It's just, like they've got like a brown wall behind them and a webcam, and they're making 14, 15K a month just through the patronage model. And so they use Patreon and Discord and some of these other things where they have like tiers of interaction with their fans. And it is an absolute testament to the power of are you familiar with Kevin Kelly's the theory of the 1,000 true fans?
Yes.
And so it is I mean, they are like living, breathing examples of that. That if you're an artist, you're a creator, you're trying to make something happen. Like you don't need to, quote unquote, go viral to make a nice living for yourself. Like if you create content that really speaks to and resonates with a certain demographic of people, they're more than happy to support you if you make that system available. And I think that you know the patronage model is something that's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. Even Da Vinci was doing that, Michelangelo was doing that, and now with the way the internet is, if you just put in the time and the energy to really cultivate connection with people who are listening, they're willing to support you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just reminded. I'm just kind of bringing it all together here with the things we've been talking about, including space exploration. I think it was the first flight of the Virgin Galactic
Mm-hmm.
uh, space tourism capsule or flight was bought out by a billionaire who wanted to put artists on board.
Wow.
And imagine him, he's probably going to do a Patreon or something similar to that to recover some of those expenses. But imagine being able to do that kind of thing, to make an experience like that come to life, not just for yourself, but for everyone.
Right.
To have artists describe the first tourist space flight ever, it seems to me like that's the way that we're going. And just it just reminded me, like I had briefly talked about AI and space exploration, but what that means is we're using AI to analyze data to make it easier to do commercial missions to the moon. And there's space weather applications, there's Earth observation applications, and it's part of this NASA Frontier Development Lab. But when we talk about those applications, the companies that are doing these commercial missions are sort of using this patronage model themselves. They're not going strictly to venture capital. They're not going to strictly to friends and family or strictly to NASA for funding. They're going to people who are kind of space heads,
right,
and saying, hey, participate in this, and then we'll give you some content. We'll give you some souvenirs. I don't know, maybe souvenirs from the moon is a little bit too far, but we'll give you this great experience, and you'll be one of the first, and this will be part of your story as well. So being able to capture that experience and deliver it and convince people that this is an experience worth paying for. There's 100 different ways to do this, and it's applicable not just to content creators online, but also in real life. And I'm starting to see this in space exploration too, which is mind-blowing.
Well, I mean, it fundamentally gets us as a culture asking deeper questions that we've not really asked before. We haven't had the opportunity to ask before about even questions like what is money? I mean, it's an idea, it's a story, it's an exchange of value, and it's always subjective, and it creates a lot of interesting problems, but also a lot of really a whole lot of new opportunities for us as a culture to create experiences where we're solving global problems, we're solving and when I say global problems, I don't even just mean things like climate issues or energy issues or whatever. Those are all super important, obviously, but even down to the point of, wow, like we can literally create those space experiences that so many of us, when we were kids, we were like, I want to be an astronaut when I grow up, and that's powerful. Like, and it's I think that the more that we evolve as a culture, I do think that we will see more and more I'd say tighter knit communities online, as opposed to, who's going to be the next Facebook, or who's going to be the next, uh, Twitter or whatever. I think there's this false premise of, how do we create this giant company where like everyone is, and I'm like, I'm not interested in that. I'm like, how can I connect with my tribe? How can I connect with people who really resonate with, certain core values and goals, and then how can we work together and create experiences that, transform things for the better, both ourselves and for our communities. And I think that we're going to see more and more of that as time goes on. And I think it's super cool that you're doing all the different work that you're doing, because they do cross over. The way that entrepreneurship applies to creativity, the way it applies to AI and 3D printing, and just having to have and cultivate that explorer spirit is something that I think, again, can be trained. But if we're not intentional about it, we can kind of squander it with just minutia and just busy work. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, money is definitely an exchange of value, but it's also a way to free up our time and give us back our ability to do more, think bigger. And if we're using these technologies and if we're using these platforms to create more busy work, then I think we're doing ourselves a huge disservice.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we're pretty much wrapping up here. So I really have appreciated the time. In the last couple minutes here, I like to ask some just kind of wrap up questions. So one of them that I always like to ask the guests that I have on here, what would you say are some of the best books that you've read recently, and why? And if it's not something recently, like, what are some of the books that you give as gifts the most?
Gotcha. I had on my 2018 reading list on my website a bunch of really good ones. There's three that just really shook me to the core when I read them in 2018, and now I'm applying them on a daily basis. The first one is I had mentioned before is Measure What Matters.
Okay.
By Door. Fantastic book about how to create motivation and intent around what you do by using the correct measures. The other one was Multipliers. I don't have the name of the author there, but this one is that book about a manager who can pull multiples of effort out of their teams. This one is actually part of the Tesla Motors Leadership Development Program, and that's where I heard it from. Another one that really impacted me when I learned this concept was 10 Types of Innovation by Larry Keeley. And it talks about, how many different ways of innovation are possible and how different types of innovation are more applicable to business or engineering or design-oriented people, and how to create, transformative things using those different types. And a book that I share a lot. So I've shared out a couple of those books pretty thoroughly, but the one that I've shared out the most, there's actually two of them. One of them is Ender's Game.
I love that book. Yeah.
It's a fantastic book by Orson Scott Card.
I haven't read it since probably middle school, but it made a very deep impact on me as a kid.
I pick it up once a year, and I'm always learning something new from it. But the book that I've shared the most, probably more than any other, is called The Guns of the South by Larry Turtledove.
I've not heard
Larry Turtledove. So it starts with, and I'm not even spoiling it this way, but the cover has a picture of General Grant. That's not General Grant. It's General Grant holding an AK-47.
So why is it that you share that one the most?
It wasn't General Grant, it was General Lee.
Okay.
Holding an AK-47. So it's an alternate history, alternate history book, and it goes in directions that you don't really expect. And I bought. There's a time when I had 5 copies of this, and I've just loaned it out so many times. I just give it out anymore.
Hmm.
A fantastic book that talks about perspectives and how small changes can have lasting impacts. But if the second book that I actually share out a lot is The Diamond Age by I'm losing it now.
Well, I have Brent will put the links in the comments here too, so that's okay if you don't remember the last name right now.
The Diamond Age is Neil Stephenson.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you want to read about, if you want a book that kind of encapsulates what some of the foundational
kind of cut out there.
Technology.
Having some technical hiccups here. Come in, Shashi. I don't know if this is going to disconnect here. Well, I might have lost him, folks. Yep. Okay. So, looks like Shashi's internet connection may have dropped out there. So, sorry about that. I will follow up with him on that. He might hop back in. Oh, there he is. Let's see. And Shashi, I don't know if you can still hear me. Hold please, folks. We're having some technical difficulties. We'll be wrapping up here shortly. Oh, there we go. And we're back. All right. Can you hear me still?
I can. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So you were saying Diamond Age, and you were saying if you want to read a book that, and then you cut out.
Gotcha. It's a amazing series about actually 3D printers and 3D printing, but it's also about a book that teaches young ladies how to be proper neo-Victorian ladies.
Interesting.
And the books are it's filled with crazy ideas that are rapidly becoming the norm for us today. I mean, how we learn from online sources, how we teach ourselves, how we build things, how we perceive the value of things when there is, when there's plenty, when there's enough to go around, what that does to society, what that does to countries. It's all in there. It's an amazing book.
Interesting. Yeah, I will have to check some of these out. I've actually only heard of a couple of them, so it's not often that I talk with people like yourself who talk about books that have impacted them that I have heard or have not heard of. So I'm fascinated now. Okay, so wrapping up here, this is a question that I hear Tim Ferriss ask all the time on his podcast, and I think it's a great question. If you could put a giant billboard in the middle of Times Square that would be seen by millions of people per day, what would you put on it and why?
So I've heard this quote before, and I'm a little torn about what I would put there.
Okay.
Maybe I would put two things that would alternate.
Okay.
Because
we can do digital billboards. That's cool.
There you go. Digital billboards, or maybe one of those billboards that knows who you are and shows the right message depending on who you are.
Like Minority Report style. What could go wrong?
oh yeah, absolutely. The first one is a quote. Those who say it can't be done shouldn't try to stop those who are doing it. There's so many people out there who, and it goes to us what we were saying before about saying no. People who, for whom they're not invested, it's easy to say no. Those who don't care, it's easy to say no. But the ones who are actively trying to stop the people who are, making new and interesting things happen, exerting those energies just because, for whatever reason they're afraid or they disagree. Those are the ones that I'd direct that one to.
Sure.
And this there's a lot of that in technology. There, you know, it's not that, you're not directly competitive, but they think that all your energy should be focused on one particular thing. And they think that you're making the wrong bet or so on and so forth. And they'll actively try to thwart you, even though they have no real reason to do so.
Right.
So that's one.
Okay.
And you said Times Square. So this is really kind of directed towards, the way that people treat each other.
Sure.
But there's another quote that I really like. I'm not impressed with your title, your money, your position. I'm impressed by how you treat others, and in particular, how well you treat others is the undertone there.
Who was it that said that? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I have it written down in one of my notebooks here.
Okay.
And,
yeah, I'll look it up and put it in the show notes. I have heard that one before, and I think that, especially nowadays, we're all of the animosity that can get brought to the surface online and whatever. It's one of the reasons why I really enjoy doing video chats, because when you have conversations with people, even if you do disagree on policy or ideas on how problems should be solved or things like that, like if you're talking with a person on video, whether it's over Skype or FaceTime or Zoom or something like this, the likelihood of it descending into an internet shouting match dramatically decreases. And I think that as we go forward as a culture in a society, that learning to be very intentional about cultivating empathy and compassion and these things that all of us grew up hearing from our parents, that hey, treat others the way you want to be treated. Like, this is something that all of us, for the most part, I think should be able to agree on, regardless of your religious or political upbringing. And so that's my goal. And I really appreciate you saying that about that billboard, because it does cause people to stop and think. It's like, hey, why am I getting riled up about this? Why am I, thumping my chest about this promotion or this title or this money or this position? Because at the end of the day, at the end of our lives, like, I've spent a lot of time around people who are on their deathbeds and whatever, and it does force you to really reevaluate the things that are important. And as we go bravely forward into an uncertain future, I think that holding those things at the forefront really will lead to a much, I think it was Isaac Asimov who said, better to create a good future than predict a bad one.
Yeah, so. Yeah. It's funny you should say this too, because his robot series was filled with examples of the difference between the way people treat each other when viewing each other versus seeing them online, versus a human person talk to a robot person, and or an artificial person, and I wish sometimes that people would read those books and and see where it could go and how bad it could get.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, again, thank you for your time, guys. I think we're about wrapping up here. And do you have any other, Shashi, any other pointers or tips that you'd like to share for anybody who's watching? Any little mantras or nuances that kind of keep you going?
Yeah, I'm a person who speaks in a lot of quotes, and the quote that I have on the back of my laptop is my teaching quote. And for creatives and for people who think that maybe that they're stuck or blocked, I want to remind you to be a seed. My favorite quote it goes like this: "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds."
Say that again. You kind of cut out.
They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. So if you feel like being buried, a seed is always something that'll find that light and grow into something amazing. So let's be a seed.
Yeah, absolutely. Mary B said, "Great talk, guys. How we treat each other is king." Absolutely. Okay. So thank you very much, Shashi, for your time. Is there anything you'd like people to know about, like where to follow you, etc.? I know we have your website underneath your video here. For those of you who are just listening by audio, it's shashijain.co. So that's SHIJAIN.co. But why don't you kind of give your any call to action that you might have here?
Yeah, I have a pretty open door policy. You can get me on social. I'm at SKJAIN2 almost everywhere. And if you're interested, if you're a student and you're interested in the Thai Young Entrepreneurs Program, definitely do reach out. We're in 30 cities worldwide and growing. If you're an entrepreneur looking for mentorship, just do reach out, and I'm always open to having a chat. And if you've got new opportunities, and then I'm always open to those as well.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Okay, guys. So for me, I love talking about how to manifest and monetize your ideas. And, one of the things that I talked about in my latest book, which is, like I mentioned before, it's a republishing of an older book on the topic, but it's called The Science of Getting Rich. And it's all about how to think, how to act, and what to do to harness your creative potential and monetize the ideas that you have. There's basically two ways that you can make money. There's the creative method, whereby you make something new, you ascribe a value to it, and people pay you and they hire you for that value. And there's the competitive method, and we're all familiar with that one. And it is my opinion that that is largely the reason for a lot of the problems that we deal with in our society these days. I think everybody has creativity inside them that's just waiting to burst forth. So if you go to scienceofgettingrich.info, you can pick up a copy of that book today. Also, if you are a business owner or have an organization and you are ready to take your branding to the next level, maybe you had somebody do it for you, your logo, a number of years ago, and you don't like how it looks, you don't feel professional, go to logos.reformdesigns.biz. We have branding packages available. We only take on a few clients a year so that we can really hone in and focus on creating a brand identity that is a really intentional reflection of who you are and what you do. So go to logos.reformdesigns.biz today to hear more about that. So that's about all I've got for today, folks. Again, Shashi, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate the conversation. I think this was really fun, and I hope that you guys listening got a lot out of this. So thank you, sir. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me, Ryan. It's been awesome.
Absolutely. So, all right, guys. Again, my name is Ryan Rhoades. I am the founder and creative director at reformdesigns.biz. You've been tuned into the Creative Revolution podcast. And until next time, keep creating on purpose. I'll talk to you soon. Cheers. All right.